All right, we're about to dig into one of the most tangled and dangerous rivalries on the planet, the conflict between Iran and Israel. It's a story packed with shadow wars, direct missile strikes, and a history that, I promise you, is way more surprising than you think. So let's get into it.
So when you think of Iran and Israel, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably sworn enemies, right? Well, what if I told you that for decades, they weren't just partners, they were actually close friends?
I know, it sounds almost impossible today, but it's absolutely true. Before 1979, the relationship between these two was one of the tightest in the entire Middle East. And listen, we're not talking about ancient history here. This was the political reality just a generation ago. So the big question is, what on earth happened?
To really get this, we have to rewind the clock to 1948. Israel is a brand new country, and it's basically an island surrounded by hostile Arab neighbors. It desperately needed a non-Arab ally in the region, and it found one in a very powerful place, Iran, which at the time was ruled by the Shah, who, guess what, also felt pretty threatened by those exact same neighbors.
And this partnership went deep. This wasn't just some polite political agreement. It was a seriously powerful economic and military team-up. For Israel, Iran was the main source of oil. Think about that. For Iran, Israel was the ticket to advanced military tech and farming know-how. They even built a pipeline together. This was pure pragmatism. Even their legendary spy agencies, Mossad and Savak, were working together hand in glove.
So, for about 30 years, this unlikely alliance actually worked pretty well. But then came 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And that single event didn't just change the relationship, it completely shattered it and turned it upside down.
The new regime, led by Ayatollah Khamenei, just flipped the entire script. In the blink of an eye, Israel went from being a strategic friend to being called Little America, an existential enemy. The new government cut off all contact and started openly calling for Israel's destruction. The alliance wasn't just over, it was dead and buried.
Now, you might think this is when a huge, direct war breaks out, but that's not what happened. Instead, the whole conflict just went underground. It morphed into a long, bitter, and incredibly bloody shadow war fought through other groups.
So what exactly is a proxy war? Well, think of it this way. It's how two countries can fight each other without ever really fighting each other directly. They fund, arm, and train other groups to do the dirty work for them. It lets them push their agenda while being able to say, hey, wasn't me.
And both sides got really good at this new kind of warfare. Iran's main strategy was building its axis of resistance, a whole network of powerful militias like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen. The idea was to surround Israel. Israel's countermove was what it calls the campaign between wars, using constant airstrikes and covert ops to weaken those groups. And the battlefield just kept expanding, into cyberspace with things like the Stuxnet virus that wrecked Iranian nuclear facilities, and into the dark with assassinations of top Iranian scientists.
And make no mistake, just because the big guys weren't fighting face-to-face didn't mean the damage wasn't real. This shadow war was devastating. It tore communities apart and destabilized entire countries, especially places like Lebanon and Syria.
To give you a sense of just how big this threat became, take a look at this number, over 150,000. That's the estimated number of rockets, missiles, and drones that just one of Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, has. I mean, they're considered the most heavily armed non-state group in the world, with more firepower than a lot of actual armies.
For decades, this was the state of play, a deadly but indirect shadow dance. But then, all the unspoken rules that kept this war in the shadows were broken. The conflict was about to come out into the open.
And when it happened, the escalation was terrifyingly fast. It started in 2024 with the first ever direct military strikes between them. By June of the next year, it had exploded into a short but vicious conflict called the 12-Day War. By early 2026, the United States was pulled in, joining Israel in attacks. It took until April before a very fragile ceasefire could be worked out.
That 12-day war was a huge turning point. It kicked off with a surprise Israeli strike on key Iranian facilities. Iran's response was just staggering. A massive barrage of over 550 ballistic missiles and more than 1,000 drones. That unprecedented attack is what prompted the U.S. to get directly involved, before intense pressure from Washington managed to force a shaky ceasefire. For a moment there, the whole world was staring into the abyss.
Bringing this conflict out of the shadows had immediate, real-world consequences for everyone. The world saw heavy casualties, global markets went into a tailspin, and the major disruption to the oil supply triggered a huge energy crisis. The shockwaves were felt everywhere.
So, all of this brings us to the most important question. After decades of shadowboxing and one terrifyingly close call with all-out war, where does this go from here? Well, experts tend to see three main possibilities.
Okay, so path number one is the best-case scenario, a diplomatic breakthrough, a real deal that limits Iran's nuclear program and brings some stability. Path two is probably more likely.